Okay, good morning, everyone. It is 9 a.m. here on the West Coast, where I, Billy Bob, am one of your three co-hosts. I've got my other co-host, Ian Kummer, in Moscow of the Russian Federation, capital city, I believe. And it is not morning there. It is, I think, what is it, 8 p.m.?
It is 7 p.m. Moscow Standard Time here. So
close. And I know Carlo Parcelli is in Washington, D.C., capital of the United States, and it is noon East Coast time there. So it is just the three of your grand co-hosts today. We are guestless, but that's all right.
Can I
go
say
ahead,
one
Car-
thing? I want to
Yes.
thank the National Guard. My lawn has never looked better. Thank you. They did a lot
yeah, I
of
was in the
work
National Guard.
breaking the leaves and cleaning the gutters. Very good job. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trump, for sending the National Guard.
There is
I was
more
in
of
the
that to
National Guard.
come. More troops coming to a big city near you to help, beautify and clean the place up.
We spend a weirdly large amount of time, like you wouldn't think that, but we spend a weirdly large portion of our careers cleaning stuff. And anybody who's in the military can tell you that. It's like it can be a strange use of resources. Yes, so yeah, very well paid janitors. That's how we often feel. But yes,
they don't like us standing around doing nothing, and so any downtime gets spent, policing and picking up garbage, things like that. But so the title of our episode today is Global Escalation. This is episode 164 of our program. And, there's a lot of things that have been going on since our last show 1 week ago. We see escalation in Venezuela. I guess Trump just met with a bunch of the opposition leaders. And, Maduro is really engaged in some defensive military posturing, suggesting that, he believes some kind of action is likely. And then just this morning, Trump is saying that he's going to do a land attack of the cartels, and I bet by cartels he can't mean anything other than the Venezuelan government, I assume. But it just looks like we're going in that direction in Venezuela. We know that there's some fuckery likely to take place in Moldova because they just rigged that election, just like they rigged the previous one, to ensure that the current government, maintains power, even though the majority of the people oppose her. They were able to rig that because all of the polling going into that said they were going to lose tremendously. And then, of course, they won in a landslide. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, shutting down of polling places in areas that are, pro-Russian, making sure that they get out the vote everywhere in the European cities where they're overwhelmingly pro-European. And so essentially they got a big win there, and that'll give that government the ability to just be, weaponized against the Russian Federation. And perhaps, a whole new front will be opening up soon. So we don't know, but that's a lot of people are speculating that. In Gaza, we have Trump just giving an ultimatum to Hamas, saying if you don't surrender, essentially, there's this plan, right? It's like release all the hostages now and, accept a prolonged occupation. It's really unclear exactly what the terms are there, and so it's just preposterous. But essentially, it's an ultimatum, and it's rhetoric, and it's going to allow Trump the position to say, well, hey, it was Hamas who refused peace, and so now we just have to, continue genociding them all. And that essentially is what Netanyahu, it seems like, is planning on doing. Okay. In addition to all that, Hegseth met with all the top brass on Monday, and that was a very interesting meeting. There was a lot of speculation. Nobody really knew what it was about, but there was a lot of quotes, a lot of things that came out of it. One of the main things is domestic dissent, and he talked about occupying these major United States cities with the military to clean them up. And also, Trump just signed into law this the ability to mobilize rapidly this quick reaction force domestically to put down protests, riots, things like that. And so, I mean, when you take all of these things, it just seems like a global escalation, and he's preparing domestically to put down any opposition to what is being planned abroad. And I mean, it couldn't be more obvious to myself, and I'm sure a lot of people, but that's kind of what I see taking shape. And I don't know, the top brass. It's interesting. So Hegseth's approach towards the military is all about, like Carlo was telling us before the show. Nobody was able to hear that, but he was talking about how it's like it's aesthetics. He has this idealized understanding of what our United States military is supposed to be. And it's all about war fighting and the warrior ethos. I mean, if you ever were in the military, they just push this warrior ethos. It's so to me, it's cringe. It's awkward. But and so he has this idea. So he's getting rid of the beards. He's shaving all the beards. He doesn't like the fat people. And it's probably gonna get rid of some of the women too. But he's really concerned with the aesthetics and the culture. And he's really, really, banging the desk about aesthetics and the culture of the military. And he's really involved in changing it. And of course, that kind of coincides with everything I'm saying about how they're going to be down and, ensuring that domestically that, there's no real opposition to what they're going to be engaged upon very shortly, abroad. So that's it. I'm going to be quiet now. And
I think we should. That's a very good summary, but I think we need to hit these topics one at a time, or our viewers will hate us. So let's try to approach it in an organized fashion. So, which of those? I mean, because they are connected, but which one should we focus on?
Carlo, your choice.
Well, Ian, segue right into the topic of Hegseth. Keep it fluid.
Okay,
yeah,
Hegseth.
let's do that. That works. So, I know we've disagreed before on the purpose and relevance of culture war stuff, right? That's an ongoing theme on this show. But I think this, particularly the meeting and just the direction the Trump administration has gone with the War Department, as it's now called, illustrates the pendulum swinging, and that the culture war does serve a purpose, particularly in the military. So I'll tell you, like the first time, we can remember the previous times the pendulum swung in military wokeness, if you will, right? So Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, which was very controversial. I mean, even among conservatives, just a very, very, by the time it was repealed by Congress under Obama, Obama signed it into law. It didn't have much support anymore, but it was still, some people left, some higher ranking guys left because, during the Bush era, it was very much, there was a certain military culture. It was very much, you had this very stereotypical military attitudes towards these culture issues, towards women, towards gays, towards all this stuff, right? And you had a very certain type of personality. So you're very typical. I'm sure you see this as well, Billy Bob, in your career. Very stereotypical, like battalion commanders, regiment commanders, brigade commanders, who are these Bible thumping Southern boys. You go to West Point or go to whatever academy and become a career military, kind of a conservative guy, a socially conservative guy. We don't need them queers around here. That kind of personality. And Obama shifted that. So he very much shifted the military culture. And I'm sure, because I definitely noticed it, leadership, not necessarily the rank and file, the 18s and 19-year-olds and 30-year-olds who were making up the majority of it. But, the leadership definitely got more liberal. You started getting more of these, blue states, California, East Coast type liberals. And that did shift. And those are the guys who were influencing the culture. So there was definitely a shift. And I don't think that was just, for appearances. Whichever side is in power wants a military that, listens to them, doesn't. And you can see, I think even the first time Trump came into office, you could see even the military leadership was working against him. Like he ordered, and that was one of the few things Trump actually did right in his first term. It's like, hey, why do we have so many guys in Syria? What is the point of all these guys in Syria? So he ordered a withdrawal. The military, I can't remember who it was Milley, I don't think it was Milley, it was whoever it was in the Pentagon at the time, lied to his face, said, yes, we're doing a withdrawal, but then didn't. And that was admitted several years later. They just told him they were withdrawing, and Trump didn't know because he was in his bubble. He had no idea. So there is a question of control. So this time around, he picks Hegseth, and people are wondering, why did he pick Hegseth? What's up with why is this? What is he? National Guard, Army Reserve Major, I guess. I can't remember, but what's so special about this guy? Well, I think Carla mentioned it. He's looking for someone who's loyal and going to work, see eye to eye on what he wants to do. And it's very much going to be another purge. I think it's very much a purge just going the other way now. So they reverse the transgender policy. What these are is loyalty tests. Like I remember when the transgender policy was first rolled out, and it was actually announced at my unit. They had a guy from legal. He was like a lieutenant colonel or a major or something. He was don't shoot the messenger. He was the unfortunate person who was picked to be the messenger, and a lot of people were mad. Like I remember, that briefing was so awkward. Like about half the people present were just furious, and they were kind of taking it out on him. It's like, well, arguing with him. It's like it wasn't this guy's idea. It wasn't this random guy in Illinois. He didn't come up with it. It wasn't his idea. You're beating up the wrong person, shooting the messengers, almost literally. I bet a lot of those people just said, well, you know what? I got 20 years in or whatever. I'm just going to get out. I'm just going to, I don't like where the culture is going. So that's in the military, what culture war stuff does. It put the people that you don't agree with you leave, and the people who do agree with you stay or are encouraged to join. And that works for both sides. So with Trump wanting the military to have a bigger role to play in the stuff he wants to do, well, of course, he's doing that. God, what was his name in the Bible? Gideon, who organized the troops. You remember that story in the Bible when Gideon organized the troops and weeded out all the people who wouldn't be useful in the battle, had different tests for them. That's what this stuff does. So, that's what I have to say on the Hegseth thing and the warrior meeting that he's doing and all that. And if you all can agree or disagree with that, I'll open it up to the floor now.
Yeah, so I agree. Definitely trying to impose cultural changes. And so, it went one way under Barack Obama, and now Trump is very overtly trying to push it back the other way. And there's no doubt about that. And that's one aspect of it. But, is there another aspect that the reason, they really want loyalty and they want to let people know what's going on? So the other thing Hegseth said was, we need to prepare for war. Because being a peacenik, you're not going to get peace. You're going to have to be subservient to someone or something. And so we have to prepare for war. We have to fight for war to have peace, and a piece of freedom. And so he's really kind of preparing the military for, it seems like, future conflict. Now, I mean, is that like what speeches for the past 20 years, 30 years have been saying, we got to prepare for war? So is it more of the same, or is there a special reason this time that it really means something more than, just a cliche military speech, prepare for war?
Well, I think that's a crucial question because if you remember, when the war on terror, when the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan wound down under Obama, declared victory in Afghanistan. We got Osama and all that jazz, and then they started withdrawing the combat troops, and so the military's had a problem since then because they did this whole. They called it back to the basics, right? They're like, okay, we've gotten into this very niche police action type operation, and it really degraded, like, not just the army, but every branch, to some degree, every branch's ability to actually be capable in a conventional war. So that's been an ongoing issue. And actually, just this week, I saw a report saying both the Army and the Marine Corps have historic lows in equipment readiness. And I think anybody who's worked on a unit recently can affirm that you have a lot of vehicles. Any kind of vehicle fleet in the military right now has a lot of deadline. I mean, a lot of it's minor. Doesn't mean you couldn't, in a couple of weeks, get all those vehicles ready to go somewhere. Doesn't mean they're just need to be scrapped. But there's very low readiness, and there's low readiness in personnel. There's low readiness in equipment. There's just even in manning, just having the people at all periods. There's missing slot. There's empty slots. So there's a lot of
lot to do, and there's only a little bit over 3 more years of Trump left to do it. So, I mean, of course, they're hoping to get Vance behind Trump and to continue that probably. Carlo, what are your thoughts on our discussion?
I found Ian's comments very interesting. I'm obviously the only one, I think the only one here that hasn't served. So stop thanking me for my service. It was basically a disservice. A number of things occurred to me. One I got from Rosalie, which was fairly obvious, is that the brass that was in the audience is used to the revolving door, as it's called, between the military-industrial complex and their positions in the military. So that's going to determine a lot of what they do. They want to retire. They want to be on the boards of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing and so on and so forth, and earn big salaries. That's one of the major reasons they're there. And that points up to Hegseth's speech, which was treating it though everybody in the audience once dreamed of being on the cover of a Captain American comic book in 1955. It was stupid. And if you really get down to it, it didn't take into account that these people are in the audience are human beings, and most of them are a lot older than he is. And Hegseth is a result of those revolving doors. The guy went out of the military and took a job at Fox News as a commentator, and then was called back in to the military. So he should know better than anybody else, what side his bread is buttered on. Believe me, he has no intention on living on a military pension, no matter what it's going to be, until he's in his 70s, like myself. He has no intention of doing that. Other things that occurred offhand whenever Afghanistan gets mentioned, I think of not only the Karzai brothers, who are smuggling, boatloads of heroin, of raw opium out of Afghanistan. Not to mention that the U.S. government was working with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and these other tribal goons who were not only smuggling drugs and murdering countrymen for money, but all of Hegseth's speech focused on the military when he didn't even touch upon intelligence and the CIA. That was what was behind the Afghan war. The military was manipulated by U.S. intelligence.
Well, I don't think Hegseth was going to give a Smedley Butler war as a racket speech. I didn't think he was going to try to radicalize the military brass. I don't think that was his goal.
No, I understand, Ian, but that was in the minds of a lot of viewers. Believe me, I was a high class muscle man for the corporations. That's what drives the military. That's what's behind the military. Not only is a revolving door, but it's the corporations as they control U.S. intelligence services. I mean, that drives all of these conflicts. And you want to talk about winning and losing. You want to talk about, women. Talk about red herrings. Women in combat who can't carry the body of a wounded, fellow serviceman, some 6'2", 220-pound guy out of a combat zone. That's a red herring. When has that ever happened? Has there ever been one occurrence of that? Not that I can remember. Not that I can recall.
I would imagine
all of that was a fantasy thing. And if you don't think those old coots in that fucking audience heard it as a fantasy, as a you know, as a Trump who's now the commander in chief, you have to maintain fitness. You have to get 2 physicals every year. Is Trump going to do that? No, he's a fat pig. So it's
Well, Trump isn't a soldier either. I mean, he's
but still, he's commander in chief. You know, let him do it.
well, FDR was in a wheelchair. I mean, he didn't do the physical fitness in World
No.
War II either. I mean,
But he knew how to lead.
I imagine that
Trump thinks that whistles are no thing. Trump thinks that Portland, Oregon, needs the National Guard.
Yeah.
He fucking couldn't tell the difference between looking at old clips on the television and what's going on there now. I mean,
I would imagine that the leftist swing, the cultural swing to the left under Obama was kind of a top down, and there was probably a lot of people in the military who resented it and didn't like it, but they dealt with it. I mean, some people left, but a lot of people probably just swallowed it and said, okay, whatever. Now,
I think that's what a lot did. Yes.
Yeah, I think Trump's swing back to the right, for lack of a better way of describing it, I think is going to be more popular, in the military, because the military tends to, attract testosterone-filled males, and so I think that what Hegseth is saying, in some quarters it's not going to go over well, but I think broadly speaking, people are going to embrace it and say, "Thank God." Like Regis. Remember Regis? He always talks about his son. So that's a cool
point. I know. And Doug McGregor, he's another one. Yeah. But I'm going to say one other thing. One thing it did seem to hint at was, and this goes along with the changing the name from defense to war, is they're preparing for something. So, and this is part of the preparation. So.
Right, and so we could see. Go ahead.
Here's the issue, though. So, I mean, even a medium-sized conflict. So I'm not even talking like a peer-to-peer conflict. I'm not even talking about Iran, who I would describe as a near peer to the NATO military. Like even just a major operation like we saw in Afghanistan or particularly Iraq. If you commit to that, that's really all you're going to be doing for the next few years. So if he wants like the National Guard, particularly doing this stuff domestically, well, they're not going to be able to, because they're going to all be in Iraq or wherever he sends them. So I think we do, when it comes to predictions, we need to keep that in mind. I don't think they're planning to do. I think they realize they can't do both, because the military leans. It's not the same military as it was in Vietnam. It does lean very heavily on its reserve components. 40 to 50% of deployed personnel are reservists. So if you want a bunch of stuff going on domestically, well, you can't if they're all either deployed or getting ready to deploy, because it's a cycle. So just because they're doing all this stuff in the military does not mean they're necessarily going to go to war. It could just mean they want a cool top-notch military, and they want National Guard troops doing Trump's bidding in liberal cities or whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go to war, and I think they're actually kind of mutually exclusive choices too.
I think the nature of these upcoming conflicts are going to be very similar to how they are in Ukraine. It's going to be a war through proxies, and it's not going to be, the United States people really, being the bulk of the cannon fodder. That's going to be, the Filipinos, the Taiwanese, South Koreans. And so I agree. I think they learned a lot of lessons from Iraq. It's like, hey, war by proxy is way better, because we had 5,000 deaths, and it was just really expensive to pay for all the health care of the hundreds of thousands of people, that put in claims after Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see how they envision it, what their plan is. But it definitely seems like it's going to be something that a lot of people are going to oppose, and they're getting ready to tamp down that opposition in a very, militaristic way. But yeah, and like Venezuela, I mean, that could be a small operation where you have, a large contingent of special forces doing specific things. And then you try and leave the occupation. You hope to leave the occupation to Venezuelans themselves. But anyway, I'm really speculating, and I mean, it's interesting to think of.
I think you're not far off from what's going to happen, because even 4 years ago in 2021, I think it was 2021. Yeah, it was 4 or 5 years ago. I actually wrote a post essentially saying that the era of large scale military deployments was over. And that's a part of the reason why Democrats were so cavalier about the changes they were making in the military, because they're interested in the loyalty test, and people are like, well, this isn't good for readiness. It's like, well, they don't really care that much about readiness, because they're not going to do it. No one's planning or think it's even possible to do another Iraq, so it doesn't matter if you're ready to do one or not. I think it's going to be exactly like you said. They're going to use proxy forces like Ukraine or Afghanistan, because people kind of were swept under the rug, but the Afghans themselves, particularly the ethnic Tajiks and the former Northern Alliance guys, were doing 99% of the fighting and took most of the casualties. Same with Ukraine; they're doing conscription. They're doing his street mobile, just grabbing people off the street. But then there's also mercenaries. There's also private military companies who you can recruit. Like Colombians. Colombians are the number one foreign country in the Ukrainian armed forces right now. So Colombians, and so I think that's really the model for what upcoming. That model would not, just to be clear, that model would not work. I mean, it does work. I mean, they're trying to do it against Russia, but it's best used against smaller countries that don't have who have a large technological and economic disadvantage. That's where it works best.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Colombian mercenaries. I mean, it just reminded me that Gustavo Petro, is that the Colombian leader's name?
Yeah, Petro. Yeah,
he's talking about getting a global army to liberate Gaza, which might end up getting him assassinated. But that would be great if we could use Colombian mercenaries for good instead of using Colombian mercenaries for bad. I would be very happy with that. But yeah, heretofore, Colombia has been a U.S. puppet state, and the Colombians themselves have always been, on the side of the United States in the death, as members of the death squads in Central and South America right now, helping the Ukrainians out. But it would be great if instead we could use them as a force for good. But it's probably a pipe dream.
Perhaps I should frame this as a question, but of course, Venezuela is not a huge drug smuggling country, and Maduro is not a drug smuggling kingpin. Obviously, it's coming out of Ecuador, and their new president of Ecuador is also the CEO of Bonita Bananas, which several Bonita Banana ships have been actually interdicted in the Pacific, carrying tons of cocaine. I mean, what could be more obvious? So you have this tremendous lie going on. This makes the Gulf of Tonkin, Remember the Maine, WMD, Yellow Cake, all that.
Afghanistan women.
Afghanistan women, babies murdered in the incubators, April Glaspie, all of that crap sound like puppy shit compared to that lie. I mean, that is a huge lie, and it's killing. It continues to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. And once again, it's run by the intelligence community. Military has nothing to do with it. Their guilt in that is negligible. So, what my question is it how gullible are the American people if there is some action taken against Venezuela. I want to add one other thing. The last time I saw this happen, so clearly, I have to go back to 1984 in Rex 84 Night Train when the Reagan administration and that nitwit, that sack of human excrement, was talking about invading the Nicaragua was planning on invading this country of 3.5 million people, planning on invading the United States, coming up through Mexico into Texas. That was literally what he was saying.
Yeah.
And there was a majority of Americans that believed it. Now I have to ask, that's one of the key questions, was if public opinion has anything to do with the Venezuelan thing. And the feedback I'm getting from the ninnies on the internet is beyond belief. Oh, that's Reagan. I mean, that Trump, he really takes it to him, sinking these little ships, these dinghies.
Carlo, I mean, you're getting right to the heart of the.
I don't really hold that much. We may get to the point where we're so back to the. I don't want to say us. Not me, white man. Not me. If the U.S. gets so backed up into a corner, it's probably going to have to start calling on women and minorities to come back into the military just for heads. A lot.
Ian, what was your thought?
Well, I think I can address what Carlo is saying, and also I want to address this comment that we just got from Turtle Soup, which is a Turtle Soup for the Proletariat, which is a great name. I mean, I feel like that's an inside joke, and I don't get the joke, but it's a great name for a channel. But he asked if I would cheer for the if I cheered for the conspiracy of wokeness weakening the U.S. military because it obviously, which I understand what he or she is saying. If it weakens the military, is that a good thing for people who are worried about being invaded by the U.S. military? Well, okay, it's a valid question. So I think, I'll just reiterate what I'd said earlier. What both sides of that binary, if you will, in the USA want a loyal military, and that's the purpose of purges. Regimes don't do purges of the government and the military because it's fun to do. They do it because they want institutions that are loyal to them. And it's more important to have an institution that's loyal to them than it is to have one that's effective. Because you say, I have a big military. Well, if the military isn't loyal to you, then having a big military is actually not a good thing if they're not loyal to you. So and that was my take. Even 4 or 5 years ago, that was my take on the whole wokeness thing. If it deteriorated the readiness of the military, that was fine because it's more important to have the military loyal to them. And also like I said, because Carlo brought up Venezuela, I think the reality of any, I think that's likely. There's probably a fairly high chance of more indirect, maybe actual direct military intervention in Latin America. It's probably Venezuela specifically, maybe somewhere else, but Venezuela comes up a lot. And there's definitely social conditioning to get American voters kind of on board psychologically with it. A few years ago, I remember before I left the USA, I was binge watching Amazon shows. Like I watched a bunch of Amazon shows. Like I watched that Jack Ryan show, and I watched like the Reacher series. And it was amazing. It was kind of amazing how often Venezuelans come up as bad guys. Like, oh, these bad guys are Venezuelan mercenaries, or it's like, oh, these are Venezuelan special forces, or they're just straight up saying Venezuela is the enemy in this season. I think the Venezuelans come up more as villains than even the Russians, which kind of makes sense because even today, it's less true now. We've kind of taken the gloves off a little bit, but there's still some hesitancy to portray major countries as direct enemies of the USA because movies do have diplomatic consequences. So you don't necessarily want to overtly show other major countries as enemies of the USA and us going to war with them. You don't necessarily want to do that even now, but smaller countries. They're not non-nuclear countries like Venezuela. Well, sure, you can say, oh yeah, we're regime changing Venezuela today. So I think that Carlos right is definitely social conditioning and psychological conditioning of the American voter for Venezuela.
That's a
I just
huge.
want
Go
to
ahead.
add also, I have to run all the scripts by the Central Intelligence Agency. They all have to be run by CIA. And the Defense Intelligence Agency, too. The DIA, in some cases, the ONI. They've got, and the other 10 or so intelligence.
Carlo, you bring up the
NSA.
problem of, how easy it is to just for the ruling establishment to go to war, and they can just pull any nonsense out of their ass, hand it to the American public, and a lot of people just don't care. They're on board with it. So, like you mentioned, the Gulf of Tonkin, which was the lie that allowed them to do whatever they wanted in Vietnam, and yeah, the point is, there are not narco traffickers leaving Venezuela on boats taking their goods up to the United States. 0% of the drugs that get to the United States leave boats on Venezuela. That is just not how the logistics work. And there's very good literature. There's very reliable data on the logistics of drugs and how they get into our country. And 0% of them leave Venezuela by boat to go into the United States. It's just preposterous. So this is a total fabrication and lie about why we're doing what we're doing in Venezuela, why we're putting on pressure. They're using this idea that it's, narco traffickers, and, the Venezuelan government is a narco trafficking government, and they work with all these narco traffickers. And it's just totally patently false from beginning to end. But that doesn't matter because American people are dumb and they don't care. I mean, that's the bottom line to a great extent. But and then the other dimension that I wanted to mention was, the ruling establishment does have natural divisions, and there is a competition between sides in the ruling establishment, and this kind of explains the back and forth, the left and the right, and the whole Democrat Republican thing, because it does it's a manifestation of real differences within the ruling class. But of course, what the ruling class doesn't care about is what is in the interest of the majority of people, the working class majority. That's one thing they don't care about. And so they fight amongst each other, and they have these wars for who's going to control what policies are pursued, what strategies are pursued. But, and obviously you see a certain side winning out. You see a certain faction being victorious with Trump being elected and with the purges in the military. And you see a new approach to things that's getting rid of the old approach of, I don't know what we can call it, but it was definitely more culturally liberal, right? And now we're seeing a pendulum swing back to a more culturally conservative. But that represents the desire of particular oligarchs and a particular ruling class faction that wants to go in that direction, because they think it's better for their interests, And when we talk about interests, of course, it's their global interests, maintaining their global hegemony, and stifling the domestic dissent, which is going to be necessary once they really start causing problems that affect people's actual, livelihoods and things like that. Okay, Carlo, I'm done.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention briefly two things. The real reasons for the attack on Venezuela. At first, is oil and gold and other natural resources. Yeah. Trump has already, expressed his bloodlust to get his hands on Venezuelan oil, and it's not unique to him, of course. It's been on the U.S. oligarchy's mind ever since 1998, when Chavez won his first election. But and the other thing is China and Russia. Russia is supplying security training to the Venezuelans, and there are a good number of Russians inside Venezuela now providing that training. China has developed, has gone and refurbished the oil base, the construction as it had degraded under the last 30 years, except
The
27 years.
refinery capacity.
Yes, and the way they're getting paid back, the way the contracts are drawn up is that Venezuela is paying back China in oil $66 billion for the development programs. Uh, uh, Maduro has been building apartments for people who had lived in favelas all their lives. Now they have running water. Now they have electricity, so on and so forth. That costs money. And the way the Chinese financed that was a deal for oil. So now this invocation of the Monroe Doctrine, which is just, blatant, white male 19th century, early 19th century hegemony, imperialism, naked imperialism, has been reinvoked. It sort of jives with what Hegseth was talking about today. But I just wanted to point out that those are the real reasons why we have these warships off the shore of Venezuela.
Yeah, no, if their number one export was carrots, we probably wouldn't care very much about Venezuela at all. But yeah, they have so much oil. They are one of the most resource wealthy countries on the planet. And they just can't stand to let that be controlled by a government that really genuinely cares about the well-being of their people more than, how it benefits Western corporations or it's really about control, control. And if Western corporations can't control it, they're going to go to war against who does control until they do. And we see that in Russia. We're seeing that in Venezuela. So the reactionaries aren't winning over the masses. Trump's approval rating is the lowest it's ever been. So turtle soup for the proletariat. No, we appreciate your commentary and watching us. So there's several schools of thought. I like Indy. Indy comes on. Is he in Indonesia? He might be he's in
Nepal. Sri Lanka. It's Sri Lanka. Yes.
But he just laughs. It's like the U.S. is a bumbling, pathetic mess that is not a threat, and it's going to just collapse because they don't have the wherewithal to really stop anything. And so so he's really dismissive of any efforts by the West, and he thinks they're all going to fail. And I hope he's right, and I can definitely appreciate and see how that's true.
I think he lets personal feelings get too much in the way because he's been to the USA, and I think he had because he did say that on his show. He did have he came to the USA on some sort of visa. I think he worked. I don't remember exactly what he said. I think he had some negative, which I understand. A lot of people underestimate the difficulties of the USA as coming here as anything but a tourist. But I think he's letting personal feelings get in the way. I do think there's there's going to be some retreats in U.S. interests because it's just a different world than it was in the 1970s, 1980s. But it doesn't mean there's going to be a collapse either. I don't think a collapse would necessarily even be good. I don't think it'd even be as good as he thinks it would be either, because you do need some balance of power. You do need a USA to balance out China and Russia. And I wish I could say the European Union, but the European Union is actually collapsing. They're in free fall, and they don't have their own. And the main reason the European Union is in free fall is because they don't have their own interests. They don't even think in terms of their own interests. Their governments are just completely captured by American interests, and they work against their own interests. So they're not a pole in the multipolar world. However, I do think the USA is going to continue to be a pole in the multipolar world. It won't be a unipole, but it will be a pole.
I think what is undeniable and indisputable is that there is a desire, by the West to maintain and even increase, if possible, their share of influence and the amount of global hegemony that they account for. They want to increase that. They don't want that to decrease, and it's been decreasing. And so there's this desire. And so the question is, should we worry about that? Should we fear that because of the things that they're going to do in order to deal with trying to further their interests. And so Indy's like, we don't have to fear that because they're inept, they're incompetent, and they can't even put their pants on, much less, get their shoes and out the door. So, and I think there's some truth to that. But I think there's also the other side is, well, they're just dumb enough to do stupid shit and to really cause a lot of problems unnecessarily in their definitely futile effort to address these threats that they see that are facing their interests. And so I think for sure there's a futility and the West can't succeed. But I think I'm more scared of what they might try and do than I think Indy is. I think that's kind of it. But anyway, I don't know why I brought him up, and we should invite him back and talk to him directly instead of talking about him when he's not here. But he's a great analyst. But I'm just saying there's 2 points. Like I'm kind of drawn to this idea that we don't, it's so fucking incompetent. Like there's no way that they could do anything. They can't, But on the other hand, we saw what they did in Syria. They got their fucking guy in Syria, their ISIS guy that they pretended, was their enemy. And we said it the whole time. The whole time we were saying ISIS is a CIA proxy. And no, they're not. We fucking made the head of ISIS.
I think that applies to Venezuela too, because what they have is they have a straw man, and like you said, a lot of people are pointing out ISIS is a straw man. They're just using it. The actual goal is collapsing the central secular government.
Yeah.
That isn't a puppet of Israel. And people are like, no, that's a conspiracy theory. Even after Julian Assange just directly said it, they're like, no, it's a conspiracy theory. I think that's essentially the same role these semi-mythical Venezuelan drug traffickers are serving. They're essentially the ISIS straw man.
Yeah.
For
they work with the global, the Western intelligence, and I mean a lot of the banking system and the global financial system. A lot of it is drugs, and if you just eliminate drugs, that would be catastrophic for the the Western economic system as we know it. And so they definitely work hand in glove. And the idea that the West is opposing the drug traffickers and they just operate in this black space that is totally an enemy of all the Western intelligence and Western society is just false. Like it's a symbiotic relationship. We know from all of the great reporting of many people. Who are the 2 guys? Gary Webb, and he was one of the great reporters. Just documenting the ties and the links about how the CIA is running drug imports into the United States. But there's another guy, not Pilger, but he's done some great documentaries. You know who I'm talking about, Carlo. He went over to the Golden Triangle area.
Alfred McCoy.
Yes, McCoy.
Yes,
that's the guy.
Yeah, Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia.
Yeah,
a brilliant book.
So
in the revised edition too.
So it's a great point by Ian that we had ISIS extremist un-Islamic terror groups in the Middle East serve the exact same function that the narco terrorists do in Central and South America. It's the exact same playbook. They just put different masks on their proxies, but they use them the exact same. And so that's a great point.
I just want to make a comment about what the last thing Sharon you had down at the bottom. I can't remember who it was. That's it. Turtle Soup. There's a difference between U.S. domestic policy and U.S. foreign policy, and they both affect each other dramatically. For example, this continues to confuse me. On the one hand, and there's no confusion about the genocide going on in Gaza, and this has turned the American people to a large degree against Israel and Zionism, and rightly so. Rightly so. In fact, it should be even more vehement, given the heinous quality of it. But you can, and this applies across the board to the media, the corporate media. You cannot find a majority of people that don't side with Ukraine in the Ukraine-Russian war and are unfamiliar with even the most basic chronology that led to that conflict. They don't know about the Azov bombing of Donbass. They don't know about the 2014 coup, U.S.-led coup. They don't know about the Minsk Accords. They don't know about the 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 the, the peace plan hammered out in Turkey. They don't know any of the details. They don't know how. They don't know about the old PNAC reports, where they basically explicitly say the job is to break up Russia and take over the fragments of it, the existing fragments, by basically Silicon Valley oligarchs, billionaires, U.S. billionaires. What was starting to happen with Yeltsin, and I know it was starting to happen with Yeltsin because I have a goddamn close relative who's a lawyer that was bartering away, helping the Russians barter away pieces of their country back in the Yeltsin years. So that was it was like they couldn't believe their good luck.
Yeah.
Not only did the Soviet Union break up, but they had a Yeltsin. But then they got up, and they've been hostile toward it ever since. And this relative of mine is hostile toward Putin. Now he knows full well what the chronology is. It's just making his life a lot harder to rip off the Russians. But that intrigues me. How can you be so right about the genocide, morally, the public, about the genocide in Gaza, even with the corporate media glossing it over for months until it became so untenable, but at the same time be so wrong about what ignited the conflict in Ukraine? I can't get my head around that.
So, I mean, you keep hitting upon this, the reality and the nature of oligarchy and capitalist dictatorship, where they control the media and they're able to do whatever they want behaviorally wise on the global stage with impunity. And then they just pull some bullshit out of their ass to justify it, right? And so, again, it's, we saw the Gulf of Tonkin. We see that, they're blaming non-existent narco traffickers out of Venezuela for their aggression against Venezuela. And then in Ukraine, there's no dissent is tolerated. Nobody with a rational perspective is given a platform in the mainstream Western establishment press. Even normal establishmentarians like Sachs and John Mearsheimer are relegated to social media and really small platforms because, again, it's just, that's the nature of oligarchy. They dominate the media. They pretend that they care about freedom of speech. Meanwhile, they censor and limit the range of views to a very, very, very small window. And so, I mean, that's just how it works. And so, but it's important. And like, people need to realize these things. They need to realize we don't have a democracy. It's an oligarchy. We don't have a free press. It's censored by billionaires. And reality is a lot different than the one that is presented for us by these, these billionaire stenographers that, are paid by, they're paid to just, sell us these illusions and sell us these nonsenses that the ruling establishment counts on to then, do these things like, hey, let's have a war against Russia. It's okay if they're nuclear armed with more nuclear weapons than we have. I mean, we'll just attrit them for the next several years. Like that doesn't benefit humanity. That doesn't benefit the planet, but it benefits this tiny minority of Western billionaires who covet control of those vast resources in that country. And that's what it's about. And same with Venezuela.
But how do you explain the difference between that and Gaza, where the U.S. media was gung ho for the Israelis for the longest time, and it wasn't working? They were moved to changing their position by public opinion. What was the difference between that and the situation in Ukraine? I don't.
No, it's interesting because
Is that a
I
level
would.
of sophistication that the American people can't understand? Is it that shallow that they can't figure
So,
that out?
well, it's true that the
Am I right?
media
They're
has
ninnies.
been more critical to Israel than ever before in my lifetime. Like the amount of criticism that is tolerated in the establishment press against Israel and against what they're doing is unprecedented. But we have to keep in mind that it's still nowhere close to being rational, right?
Oh, I agree.
So
But
it's
I mean,
still extremely censored, extremely dishonest, while at the same time it is more critical of Israel than it's ever been. So I mean, you see a little bit of movement, but it's nothing that it's they've been forced due to the realities on the ground to deal with it how they are. But how they are dealing with, they're still running inference for it, running interference for Israel. They're still facilitating the genocide. They're not. They're certainly not trying to stop it. They're still certainly not trying to, bring justice or peace to the Middle East. No, the bottom line is Israel is our weapon to control that very important area with all the resources that it has there.
but I was
As
thinking of
far as
the U.S. public in general. But go ahead, Ian. Go ahead.
Well, as far as this, like Carla brought up, you have a lot, and I know exactly, I don't know the guy he's talking about, but I know a lot of people like that who are anti-Israel and pro-Palestine, pro-Palestinian, and also pro-Ukraine. And I asked him, that doesn't make any sense because Zelensky and Netanyahu are best buddies. Ukraine and Israel are best buddies. They send each other mutual aid. Israel sends Ukraine Patriot batteries. Ukraine sends volunteers to fight in Gaza. It's like, how can you possibly sit there and say, I stand with Palestine. I'm against the genocide, but I support Ukraine against Russia's bad invasion. Well, I'll tell you why. Because even if you look at, like, I would say, not Arabs, not because the ethnic vote you, because usually it's people who have some very personal connection, right? So like Muslims, that Arab and Middle Eastern segments in the USA, of course, it doesn't apply to them because they have that personal connection. But if you talk about your soy latte white liberal, if you look at what they say about the Palestinian issue, you'll notice it's very carefully curated. So it's almost, I don't want to call it controlled opposition, but it basically is controlled opposition because they really stay inside the lines. They do not color outside the lines. They're very concerned about not wanting to be anti-Semitic. They frame their arguments very carefully. And they constantly bring up Israeli talking points. Like I see this on these accounts I follow on social media all the time. Like these guys who are like, oh, Israel is bad, Netanyahu is bad, Israel's committing genocide. But in the same breath, they'll say, well, Iran is worse, Yemen is bad. So it's like, well, okay, what's the point of saying you're against Israel if you agree with everything, if you agree with all Israeli propaganda, right? And yes, I've seen this screenshot. I didn't read the article. I've seen this Politico screenshot that Billy Bob just showed up, because I do think Palestine did, in part at least, cost Kamala Harris the election.
For sure.
Because polls conducted after the election that showed more than a third of Democrat voters who just stood at, didn't vote. And I don't mean they went and vote for Trump, but we're just talking about registered Democrats who did not vote. And they were asked, why did you not vote? And a third of them said, because Kamala Harris supports the genocide, right? And what's Democrats' response to that? They're like, well, we need to be more pro-genocide, right? So they have this headline. We need more of these Israel supporting millennials, right? So it's like they're doing the opposites. Like they didn't take that lesson. They're doing the opposites. That said, though, I do think the Israel lobby is in serious trouble. And it's not even because I think Democrats are going to become, because they have because they lean so heavy, because Democrats lean, let's be honest, Democrats lean so heavily into those non-white demographic groups, right? So those Muslim voices, those Arab voices, just all of those, they play they have an not oversized, that's not the word, disproportionate, maybe that's the word I'm looking for, disproportionate voice in the Democratic Party saying, hey, we don't like Israel, they're committing genocide, they're evil. They don't particularly like Jews because let's be honest, the Democratic Party for the past 50 years has been a very Jewish oriented party. There's Jewish liberals in universities, in the intelligentsia, the Jewish that's a thing that exists. But this new Democratic Party looks at those old Jewish intellectuals like, well, fuck you, dude. You love Israel, you love genocide, go screw yourself. So that's changing the face of the Democratic Party. But at the same time, the right wing, I think once the boomers are gone, I think Trump might, Trump is the titular boomer president. He's like the stereotypical boomer with his boomer tweets. I think after him, Israel, I don't know what's coming. I don't know what they have going for them after Trump. I mean, what do they really have? Because, I just look at some of them still like Israel, but there's a very, that's, the younger you go, the fewer right-wing and Republican and conservative voters actually like Israel. Most of them don't, and they have kind of this similar views. Billy, you want to say something?
They're not so imbued.
Go ahead.
They're not imbued with the memory of the Holocaust like my generation was.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Billy Bob.
Well,
go ahead, Billy.
I have a question I want to ask Ian about where
I'm trying to think of what my point was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So there was Netanyahu was in front of the United Nations, and Netanyahu said, these European leaders who denounce me in public thank me in private. And I believe he is 1,000% correct. He is 1,000% honest, because ultimately the Western ruling establishment, all the leaders, understand the function that Israel serves for Western imperialism, and they support that function. And they support that function even when that function is engaged in a genocide. So the point is, Western imperialism isn't based on liberal values. There's no such thing as democracy. And whenever liberal values come in conflict with imperialist interests, it's the imperialist interests that win out. And that gets to my constant assertion, that liberalism itself is a facade and a lie designed to uphold, imperialism and oligarchy. It's the ideological justification for imperialism and oligarchy. But my concern is that there will never be accountability, or nobody will ever be held accountable or responsible. And so if they can, they will simply genocide the Gazans, force them out, even in a year's time after 90% of them starve to death or whatever. Nobody will ever be held account. Eventually, all those Arab despots that are in league with Western imperialists, Qatar, the Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, all those countries will sign on to this effort, first to destroy Gaza, then to try and destroy Iran, and that's coming. Another war against Iran is coming very soon. Also in Lebanon to get rid of any kind of resistance in Lebanon, and then this Abraham Accords, this wet dream of Trump and the Kushners to develop beachfront property in Gaza and to have a totally Western aligned Middle East with all these puppets in power, all on board with the same agenda. My concern is that is a possibility. and that the resistance is not strong enough to overcome, what Trump is trying to do there. And so that gets us back to this question about Indy. Are these people incompetent? Should we just laugh at their machinations and their big vision that they could never in a million years see to fruition? I mean, I hope so. But part of me worries that, there's just not strength. The resistance is not strong enough to overcome, what the West is bringing to bear. So, I mean, we will see. I mean, I hope Iran, can be strengthened from China, from Russia. I see some of that taking place. There's reports, about these big transport planes being unloaded in Iran and then flying back to Russia and coming back. I hope that's true. But I do worry. I do worry for that region, because I know these fucking despots in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, they're not to be trusted. They will throw all of their loyalty behind Trump and behind this Abraham Accords, because they're being promised, in perpetuity, their privileged position. And it's awful. Like, these countries are awful. Like, you take the UAE or Qatar. I forget. They're like, it's like a 6 million people, maybe 3. Okay, I shouldn't put. The point is, they're mostly indentured servants from Indonesia. The actual population is a fraction of the population, and they live with tremendous benefits. Meanwhile, they exploit mercilessly these migrant, laborers that come and clean their houses, run their hospitals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it is not a vision of a utopian society that is interested in any kind of justice or morality that, as socialists, we support. But again, it does.
The problem.
All right.
The problem with these Arab states, I mean, we unfortunately kind of saw that on full display in Syria. The problem.
Yeah.
I mean, we can ascribe all sorts of reasons for it. We can ascribe the fact that for the past 200 years, there's been French and British colonial authorities in the Middle East, right? So there's a lot of reasons we can ascribe to it, but the problem that the Arab states, not just the Gulf states, but just, I would say, the Arab states in general have, is that they did not develop their own nation states. And by a nation state, I mean, a legitimate collective identity of saying we are Iraq, or we are Syria, we are Saudi Arabia. What these states are, I would actually call them pseudo states. So it's a one family operation. There's one family that's running the show, and all you have to do is remove that one family from power. However, in Syria's case, it was a military coup. His own army officers turned against him, and not all of the Assads escaped. I guess a couple of them, unfortunately, did not escape. The family actually did catch wind of the conspiracy and fled to Russia in time. But it's basically their most senior military officers were feeding them false information, and were planning to just arrest them, but they escaped in time. And that's something that happens when you have a very weak nation state, where the majority of people don't consider the government as is representing them. It's just like, okay, it's the Assads. I don't really care about the Assads. I don't care if they get run out of power. That's unfortunately, that's a problem, because you have America pays them, Israel pays them, and these regimes are happy. They're not necessarily happy, but they tolerate this genocide because they're paid to. Egypt tolerates it. I think honestly, Saudi Arabia is kind of happy about it, because they're. I would not call Saudi Arabia a benign influence on the Middle East, unfortunately. But these countries that should be embargoing Israel don't. And the reason why is because they're paid not to. And I do think it's true that, on the grassroots level, the people in those countries are very unhappy. But because it's not really exactly a nation state, they don't do it. They don't really necessarily do anything about it. And that might change. This could undermine those. I mean, this could, by supporting Israel to the bitter end, it could I do think it damages credibility of all. I do think it's true that every Arab government that is so overtly backing Israel and genocide, that's going to weaken them. But they get away with it because it's unfortunate. I am very disappointed that the Arabs let this go as far as it did, but unfortunately they did. We can't deny that. But that said, I don't see where Zionism is going to go after this. I mean, really. I mean, everybody on the show, think about it. I mean, where's Zionism going to go? I mean, because you have, like Carlos said, you have the people who studied the Holocaust in school and were just upset. Like my father is obsessed with Israel. Like, I think it is I think boomers and Gen X, and to a lesser extent millennials, are very ingrained with we have to support Israel at all costs. But I think, I was thinking 20 years Israel is going to be in trouble, but it might even be sooner than that. And also,
Go ahead. Sorry.
As far as the genocide goes, I mean, it's terrible, and they are using starvation tactics. It is like the siege of Leningrad. They are overtly trying to starve them out. But I mean, just to be brutally honest, if the starvation tactics were going to work, they would have worked already. So they are, through covert means, getting enough. They're not getting enough foods, but they're not dying. They're not all dead, because when there's a famine, people just die. When food completely runs out, people just die in a few weeks, and they haven't. We've been going on almost 2 years now, close to 2 years now. So they're getting. So I think Israel. I think Netanyahu is getting scared. I think that's how I interpret his actions and his speeches lately. He's getting scared. I think
those are
go ahead.
No, I appreciate your comments. And I think my initial response is I have a greater appreciation for the West's ability to rehabilitate over years and to whitewash over years. And they can, their propaganda machine can get past this, right? So the idea that what is going on now is something that they'll, will be the end of Israel and will result. Like, I don't believe that, because I know that Hollywood is owned by the West. We'll say the West, and the media is owned by the West. Academia is owned by, and so these forces can rehabilitate and change history. And
that's true. So, but Billy Bob,
I wish there could be accountability like you're talking about, and I hope you are correct. But I'm cynical, and I've seen how people's focus and people's ideas and opinions are very malleable. And as angry as they are at Israel right now, I could see how once it's done and over, it like life goes back to normal, and they and we got the Abraham Accord.
I mean, you keep saying. I mean, the problem is you're thinking too abstract, because think on the personal level. Who? I mean, you say forces, but who? Because I don't think any young leftist under the age of 50 is ever going to make a pro-Israel Hollywood movie again. Like I remember, like in the 90s and 2000s, you had all those movies, like action movies, set in the middle. They always portrayed Israel as kind of this benevolent, democratic force for good. There's Holocaust survivors. They're, an ocean of enemies who are extremists and they hate them. I don't think Carlo, feel free to disagree. I don't think any left-wing person under the age of 50 is going to make a movie like that again.
I just think that since they have to run scripts by the U.S. government, that as long as Hollywood is in bed with CIA and like I said, the Defense Intelligence Agency and other intelligence services, that those scripts that have any hostility toward Israel, even the smidgen, that they're going to be turned down or have to be heavily revised. I just think that.
Well, even
I don't want. This is a good discussion you guys are having, but I have something I've been dying to ask Ian. because
Yeah, go ahead.
two things transpired in the last couple of weeks, and to me they're very similar. That is, uh, uh, most of the people I read and listen to predicted that the Ukraine war would end before the summer was over, this summer, and also the rapture occurred as was supposed to occur, and neither took place. So that prompted me to read on the more and look at more of the press that says Ukraine is winning the war. The new Trump blow it out, bloviating position, and I wanted to ask, and one of the things you saw were huge demonstrations in Moscow against Putin, and I wanted to ask Ian, living in Moscow, what he's actually seeing. How did it go, Ian? Did you see those?
Well, I mean, so there's this whole. Well, that's just one time when I'll say I'm glad there was no rapture because,
Yeah.
well, that would be bad for me because I'd be stuck with you guys here, right? we would still have the show. At least we would still have the show. None of us would have been raptured. We would just be here with the show. So the rapture happens. So I'll say I'm happy there was not a rapture. And it's funny you mentioned the war being over by summer 2025 because I was one of the people saying that. I was sure, and this was I was making that prediction even when I thought Trump was going to lose and it was going to be Biden or Kamala Harris as president. I was just like, the material reality is they're going to realize we have to cut our losses and make a deal. And it's going to happen in 2025, so it doesn't poison the midterms. And my model for that was Afghanistan, because Afghanistan ended in 2020. There was a lot, because it was a Democrat screw up, as a Biden screw up. Of course, Fox News and all those guys ran with that, say, oh, look how stupid Biden is, look how stupid Democrats were. But there was enough time. By the time the election itself came around, no one was even talking about Afghanistan. So kind of positioning the end of a military conflict in there's that sweet spot, so it doesn't, so people get mad about it and they forget about it before the election. That's what I was thinking was going to happen this time, but it looks like I'm mistaken. Though a lot of people shared that tweet or Truth Social where Trump was saying, "Oh, Ukraine has the ability to win and take back all of their territory." I think they're reading too much into it because Trump has also said the USA is no longer giving aid for free. The European Union is paying for it. Is being paid for. So what ended was the free, just Biden writing blank checks to Ukraine. And I do think Trump isn't lying about that. I mean, I can't prove that, but I think that's true. The European Union is so Russophobic, is so emotionally committed to the war. They said, okay, fine, please just don't abandon Ukraine. Please just send them weapons. We will pay for it. We will defund every welfare program we have to pay for Ukraine. And that's basically what Mertz, whoever his name is, said. It's like, Germany can't afford the welfare state anymore. It's like, well, why can't they afford the welfare? Because he needs to pay for Ukraine. They will cut every program they have. They will defund every grandma in Germany before they'll let Zelensky not get any more money. So I can't even say, it's very unscrupulous. It's extremely brutal of Trump to do that, but pragmatically it makes sense. It's like, well, okay, sure, we won't give Ukraine weapons, but we'll sell them weapons. Sure, we can do that for another 2 years or 3 years. Now, I think, me personally, I think that's a mistake because we're looking at Ukraine's having very serious problems right now. Their desertion rate for 2025 and 2025 isn't even over. it's already had a higher desertion rate than the rest of the war combined since 2022. The desertions this year alone have exceeded 2022, 2023, and 2024 put together. So I think, and they're just so much of their male population is fun. So I don't see how much longer they can drag this out. And the longer they drag out, the worse of a deal they'll get. I don't know. But I can understand Trump's perspective. That's like, hey, look, we're not paying for it. All it's doing right now is benefiting our companies making these weapons, and the EU pays for them and then sends them to Ukraine. I understand. I don't agree with it, but I understand the perspective. So, Carlo, did I answer your question?
No, let me play devil's advocate for a second. One of the things I read about in the press that saw Ukraine as the inevitable winner of this war was their new counteroffensive. And but the question I have is, being in Moscow, are you seeing large?
I'm sorry. I did forget to answer that question. Yes. So I didn't hear about the mass protests. I didn't even hear the propaganda about it. What I did hear about is how every gas station is running out of gasoline. I did hear that story.
Yeah, right.
And that's and the unfortunate one is you have to basically consider, unless proven otherwise, you have to really consider everything they say about Russia is just fiction. I mean, it's actually kind of amazing because it's like, and I get this on my blog and my Quora page all the time. People say, oh, well, you're in Russia. Aren't you guys all like out of gasoline? You have to, it's like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about. But I see the Reuters articles. I see all these articles about how Russians don't have gasoline. And that's like a thing that people who read these news stories, like you're saying, they believe it. Oh, well, Putin's almost about to get run out of the country. The regime is collapsing. If you just read these news stories and believe them, that's what you would think. It's like living in a parallel universe. And it's funny because some of these stories, I feel like they repeat every year. Because like I distinctly remember these refinery checks last year, and they're like, oh, Russians are running. I feel like they run the same story every year and just assume everybody's forgotten they said it already. It's like, well, I remember them talking about the refinery attacks last year, and they're like, oh, Russia's in trouble because they're attacking the refineries. And then now we're doing it again this year.
How do you even keep your food cold? All your, your chips have been taken from the refrigerators, put them into missiles. And so none of your refrigerators.
Well, because they steal them from Ukraine. They steal the Ukrainian washing machines and use those chips to build their missiles.
So
yes. I even had one guy, like I remember I wrote this blog post, and this one guy was like, well, because they're attacking the refineries, that means you won't have heating this winter. It's like, do you even understand how things work? Like, refineries don't have anything to do with heating for houses. That's not even how it works. It's just it's amazing how people take this propaganda and just run with it. And Joan of Arc, I'll show this comment. Putin's got cancer. Putin's dead already, or he's got clones of himself. And the ruble will be rubble. The funny thing about the ruble is that it's basically at the same level as far as the exchange rate with the dollar as it was at the beginning of the war. It's a little bit, but it's basically where it was at the start.
I think the comment just before the last one, is it frugal? I'm sorry, I'm trying to listen and read those at the same time. I think that was a very astute comment about Trump not really being, Trump was never for cooperation with Russia. I think that's a very astute comment, but it points up another irony. This notion that, if you watch or read some article or watch some YouTube thing, and you're going along with what the individual is saying about U.S. basically domestic foreign policy, but in many cases, foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, like on Venezuela, that you'll be in agreement, and then you'll come to that point where they point up the Putin and Trump being the greatest of pals. That Trump is a buddy of Putin's, and they're so close and all that stuff. And it's just simply not true. It has no basis. It has no basis in fact. Trump only has one buddy, and that's Trump. And there's no connection. No,
there was a heavily invested propaganda effort to tie those two together.
Exactly.
The Russiagate hoax.
Another
and even though that has been debunked, I mean, it's still alive and well in the minds of certain anti-Trump partisans. I want to say that I also, like Ian, was wrong with regards to thinking that, especially after the Alaskan summit, I really thought Trump was going to come to a deal that Russia could agree to, and that Trump could force the EU to capitulate and also agree, simply because Trump, had that kind of power over the EU. So I was really thinking that by the end of September, and today's the 30th, so I'm wrong now, that we would see, due to Russian progress on the ground and a certainty that there's no military victory, that Trump would force the EU to agree to certain concessions that would allow for an actual ceasefire that Russia could agree to. And if Russia agrees to it, it's a decent deal. But that has not been the case. Trump has not, assuming he was even trying, Trump has not been able to get concessions from the EU that would be agreeable to Russia. So, I want to just concede my error, as well as Ian was conceding his error. So we're having a struggle session here. I was wrong too.
Struggle session, yeah.
But what the other thing that's ignored, and that has to do with Alaska, is that the United States is not an arbitrator in this conflict. They're the main belligerent. They caused the war. The U.S. caused the war in Ukraine.
But
if it wasn't
they've
triggered
also
by
lost it, and they don't have any.
By Victoria Nuland and the 2014 Maidan coup. Excuse me.
Of course,
the Donbass would have eventually triggered it, because they were killing thousands of Russian speakers. The Nazis, the Ukraine Nazis, were killing thousands of people.
No, they started the war with the hope they could win the war, and now they don't have that hope anymore.
It was a U.S. concocted war.
Yeah.
So,
but now that they don't have any hope that they can win it, they need to figure out what to do. And I really thought what they were going to do was to freeze it, get some agreement that Russia could deal with, and then they were going to do their pivot to other places: Iran, China, Venezuela. But they might,
So here's the problem. I think partly, and I see this, and I've actually seen this since the beginning of the war, because Russia did these unilateral, concessions at the end of the Cold War. It's like, hey, you know what? We'll let loose these non-Slavic countries. We'll cut loose, the Warsaw Pact. They did these and they were unilateral. There's like, a verbal. Basically, it was. We can talk about whether it was in writing or not, but the point is, it was a unilateral. Like, oh, we're going to make concessions and hope the other side reciprocates, which, in hindsight, was a huge blunder. Not even getting to the whole, communism and command economy arguments, but just, geopolitically, it was a huge blunder to end the Cold War with concessions, assuming that it would be a period of friendship.
Yeah.
That was a huge error. But I think the problem is that Russians understand that was a huge error. Meanwhile, over in the USA and Europe, they're like, well, because they made all those concessions at the end of the Cold War, we said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and they did tear down the wall, and lifted the, all that stuff. They think they can do it again. I think maybe that's what Trump was thinking about. Oh, well, I can just, it's a new Putin is Gorbachev, and Putin is not Gorbachev. Putin has his flaws, but he's not an idiot.
He's smart enough to learn from history.
Right. So he met with Trump. He shakes hands with Trump. He gives Trump those golden cufflinks. He does all the
He's
diplomatic.
going to surrender to Trump.
Right. He doesn't make these unilateral concessions. Right. And the problem is that Trump had nothing to offer him.
True. Yeah. Trump couldn't because he doesn't have the backing of the entire Western establishment, or so they're not going to. It turns out the West is not interested in coming to an agreement, a compromise that Russia could accept. That's what seems obvious now. I wanted to just go to the comments because the comments are really lively. So a lot of happening. So Carlo is being personally attacked in the comments, and then this person is telling Carlo to walk away from the light. Don't do that, Carlo. Walk towards the light.
I am.
Very mean. And then it turns out, in a weird twist, that Turtle Soup for the Proletariat is Dust James. Who knew? We did not know that. So that's interesting.
Well, it's a great brand name. I will congratulate Dust because it's a great brand name. Turtle Soup for the Proletariat is a great brand name. I don't quite understand the profile picture. It looks like a flower, but it's an excellent brand.
It's a beautiful
turtle it's a turtle shell. Okay, I have my phone. I couldn't quite see what it was. Yes.
Let me just tell that previous note that came in. Why I look like I'm breathing my last breath because I actually am. I have cancer, and my back is destroyed because it's multiple myeloma, which affects the bones. So if you saw me try to negotiate around the house here, you would see that I am on my last legs.
And Todd did explain that. Todd,
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Todd.
Informing.
Right.
But honestly, Carla, you were looking great. You are much improved because you have been on our show where you were struggling. You were clearly struggling. So no, we're happy to have your input and your perspective. What else do we want to hit on here? I had some things running through my mind that have since escaped.
Well, we talked about domestic, we talked about Hegseth, we talked about woke politics and counter woke politics. We talked about Palestine. We talked about Venezuela. We talked about the Trump-Putin negotiations. And I think we kept the threads that they're all kind of connected. We're maybe going back to some sort of quasi Monroe doctrine and an understanding that the reality is that the USA does not control, more than half of the world's GDP anymore. It's not. It's not the same world anymore. And Carlos shaking his head. What do you got?
Don't worry about it. No, I was telling the guy who.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
that. Don't worry.
I don't agree with our friend from Sri Lanka. I don't think like these guys are stupid. I mean, I am baffled at how Democrats folded so quickly. I will say the liberals. I mean, I'll say that the American liberal establishment folded faster than the Russian liberal establishment. At least the Russian liberal establishment put up a little bit of a fight first before they got squashed. But I mean, I'm amazed at how quickly they folded. But that said, I don't think the U.S. establishment it's divided by when it say they're completely. I do think that's a mistake to say they're completely incompetent. They're toothless. But I do think they, despite all the bullshit, have a somewhat correct understanding of what's happening. And we're seeing that in the Trump administration. They're realizing, okay, look, we can't, it's not the banana wars anymore. We can't land 100 Marines in Venezuela and conquer Venezuela. You know, they're understanding we can't land 100 Marines in Russia. We can't land 100 Marines in Venezuela or Iran. You know, it's not that world anymore. So they're refocusing, and so I think this is a period of refocusing. So they're eliminating dissent in the homeland, and they're refocusing priorities overseas. I think that's what we're witnessing right now.
Yeah, and you know the liberal side of the culture war within the ruling establishment has ceased to you know, its effectiveness has ceased to be helpful. So you know, it's
What do you think before we end? What do you think? I mean, because
okay.
like I see, you know, it's funny because I have these what I call them canaries because I see these liberal accounts on social media and I see them like kind of virtue signal and it kind of it predicts which way the liberal, you know, that side of the establishment is going. So it's like, you know, I see a lot of them cheerleading for, like I even see Europeans cheerleading for Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny because when I saw those cheerleading posts, I kind of thought to themselves, oh, wow, the Democrats are so desperate. They got an old white guy to be the next presidential candidate. I think it's not even a joke. I think that's, yeah, actually, Billy Bob, I remember you saying Gavin Newsom would be a logical candidate for the 2024 election.
Yeah, I was
Which didn't
surprised
happen.
they let Kamala.
That they went with Kamala Harris, who nobody likes,
Right.
like literally no one likes, and now they're doing it 4 years too late. They're like, oh well, maybe we should run Gavin Newsom. That does seem to be what's happening. They're kind of prepping him to be the nemesis of Trump or whoever. I guess whoever replaces Trump, he's the next.
I wanted to make the point that you know, with what the ruling establishment consensus needed to do globally, they had to jettison liberalism. They had to jettison the rule of law. They had to jettison the transatlantic alliance. They had to jettison this globalist approach and this pretense that they give a fuck about human rights, that's their guiding moral philosophy. Like they had to jettison all that. And that's why we're seeing a shift in the cultural hegemony from liberalism towards a more fascisty approach that is wrapped up in nationalism and basically wrapped up in nationalism. And with that, of course, comes some racism, some you know, cultural, some Christian nationalism, also, you know, religion, race. So that's the trend that we're going towards, because the things that they need to do are kind of incompatible with the liberalism that they were preaching, you know, 10 years ago. And so that's why this shift is coming. It's a shift of necessity due to the interests that, you know, they see, like, and what they have to do to achieve those interests, those global interests. And they can't use liberalism as a terrible vehicle for that. And that's why Kamala lost. That's why Trump is in. And that's why we're seeing this rightward.
I think, do you remember when Vladimir Goldstein, who's the professor for the viewers, he's the professor from Brown University, comes on our show, and he's saying that, you know, he was just seeing from his observations of students, the Democratic Party is becoming increasingly pro-Palestine. I don't think he's wrong. You know, I didn't quite agree with him at the time. I don't think he's wrong, but I think Newsom being pushed to front and center is kind of pushback against that. The Democrat establishment realizes, okay, you know, the rank and file Democrats are really anti-Israel. So we're going to take this very safe white guy who is just a foaming at the mouth Zionist, because Newsom is a hardcore Zionist. We're just going to take this very safe candidate who is a Zionist, and we're going to ram him down people's throats next election cycle. I think that's...
Yeah, no, the Democrats would rather lose and maintain, you know, the global empire than win and be forced to do things against the interests of the billionaire class. So they would much rather lose. And so, I mean, you know, they would never run a candidate that is popular with the masses, because, you know, he would be expected. They would win in a landslide, and then they'd have to incorporate policies that
Well, I think Newsom would have won if they ran him last time. I think they're running him 4 years late. I don't think he's going to win this election cycle. I mean, I could be wrong, but if they ran him against Trump, I think Newsom would have won. But they're responding. It's a decision-making
we don't
site
know
here.
what his platform would have been. We don't know what he would have said to get people on his side. So it's kind of like an impossible question to answer.
We don't know. But the dog is driving me. If you see, he's driving me insane right now. So he wants to go outside.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will reconvene perhaps Friday, maybe next week. But thank you so much for watching, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.